yeah, I eventually relocated here. I was mid-20s, so kind of, yeah, let's give it a shot. Not much to lose. Very exciting region, fast growing, and actually ended in the Philippines, which is pretty much after 2009, the financial crisis, 8-9, was really kind of emerging, picking up in terms of emerging market, right? And so actually ended up working for CBRE. So that was my kind of first experience into real estate. So I never really planned to go into real estate. My background was more into, my first job was insurance, then ended into doing all kinds of jobs, and then ended into marketing in Switzerland. That was also that I felt I'm most drawn by. Yeah, I ended up working for CBRE for a year. What I realized there is like, I'm definitely not a broker. I don't see myself as career broker. So that was like first year experience. While I was working there, I met two American entrepreneurs, which were already living in Manila for quite some time. They were in the process of establishing businesses at a very early stage. And one of the businesses was actually a real estate brokerage firm, and one was a co-working space. So I ended up, yeah, let's give it a shot instead of going back to Switzerland or like continuing my brokerage career with CBRE. I joined the early stage startup. I was employee number 10. Today, the companies have 500 employees, enterprise values well above 100 million without really venture capital. And so, yeah, it was very exciting 6.5 years I spent working in startups related to real estate. So after 6.5 years, so I ended up deciding to set up my own. That was 2017. Why did I decide to set up my own? It's a lot of the work I was doing while advising landlords on leasing mandates and for their commercial property was really the work tools I was using with my team were extremely manual. So everything done in Excel, a lot of manual work, a lot of data crunching, ad hoc decision making. And so me and the ex-colleague there, he was the head of research, I was the head of landlord rep. We were like, hey, that can be done better. That should be done somewhere in the software in the cloud. And so we started to research. We realized, that was 2016, we realized in the US, the whole Proptech movement actually started already around 2010, 11, 12 in mostly in New York. And so we saw, yeah, there's opportunity. We pretty much resigned from our jobs and started a tech company without the CTO. So one tip, never do that in your life. So first try to figure out who's your CTO before you start a tech company or a prop tech company. So yeah, we pretty much probably wasted 1.5 years and quite some money of investors as well. Eventually, we were able to find a tech person, rebuild everything, and yeah, we built data analytics and leasing platforms for commercial real estate landlords, help them on pretty much projecting all their income, so all their tenancy stacking plans, and then as well a small CRM side. So if you're in the US, if you're looking around in PropTech, there's something called VTS, and that will be the most similar than what we are trying to do. Yeah, we went through some accelerator programs. We were in Techstars last year in Toronto, actually a year ago. That's actually where I met Nelson as well. So we were seatmates, and yeah, it was actually an exciting journey. So I would also recommend whoever decides to start a business, it's probably good if you go through one of those accelerator programs. I think first, if you're a first-time founder, it's learning how to build a business, what decision to be made, what to avoid at the beginning, that you're more efficient. So it's a great network, the likes of Techstars, Y Combinator, etc. There are a lot of PropTech accelerators as well, which we are touching on later. Yeah, I decided to step back on the data analytics and leasing platforms called Talox early this year, because I felt my heart wasn't really there anymore. And so right now I'm kind of pre-launch of a digital marketing platform for still the real estate industry. And it's something we actually used in terms of digital strategy, marketing strategy. We used 2011 to 13 to scale up the two companies I was working for. And yeah, fast forward, the real estate industry hasn't changed that much here in Asia. So tech penetration and tech enablement is still quite low, especially also compared to the US. And so there's still plenty of opportunity. And yeah, that's pretty much my journey to PropTech, my journey to startups. And yeah, great to have you guys here today and share experience.
Yeah, cool. So I'm happy to share a little bit about my journey as well. So I actually came from outside the real estate industry. After I studied sort of economics and maths, that I started working as a quantitative trader and researcher at a hedge fund out in New York. So very much building these quantitative investment models that can predict, what you should be buying and selling in public markets. I came back to Singapore. I did a PhD at INSEAD in decision sciences. So again, how can we sort of make decisions using sort of mathematical guideline, right? And then worked in sovereign wealth fund (GIC) for a little bit with tactical asset allocation. Again, how do we figure out some rules for which asset classes we want to be exposed to? And then high frequency trading, right? So again, everything very much machine driven. Given the data, how can we decide what to own and what not to own and what to short and things like that? Then I started, along the way while doing all of that was investing in real estate in a couple of different places, Singapore and then London and Tokyo, and was looking around at Spain and things like that. And sort of realized that, the practice is pretty different. And if you wanted to answer a question, let's start without doing any prediction. Just if you're investing, and let's even narrow it down. Say you want to invest in residential real estate. Where in the world is offering you the best current net yield? It's actually surprisingly difficult to answer that question today, and no one's really put out an answer. So we were looking around and said, there's actually an opportunity to do that and to go beyond and do even more than that, right? To say, okay, well, given all of the data, these are the markets that we think are going to appreciate the most, and use that as a quantitative strategy for real estate. That's how we got started. It was about 2.5 years ago, right? And we founded this company, PropertyQuants. And that journey, as with all kinds of startup journey, I think that Yves was alluding to, it's sort of not linear, right? It's very circular and you move around. A couple of things sort of went well for us. We did one of the key things was we were lucky enough to get into that college Techstars Proptech Accelerator, and we'll talk a little bit more about accelerators in a bit. And that's a good experience, but at the same time, what we kind of took away from it is there's this real disconnect, right? You chat with like the senior management, and if you look at like, KPMG PropTech survey, at a high level, people are saying, okay, what is one of the big trends that's going to affect real estate in the medium to long term? And it's always like, oh, big data and AI is something that like, half of the participants will say. And then you look at the people on the ground and we said, hey, we as a company apply data science to real estate. And people will give you this blank stare like, oh, what is that? What is that all about? What does that even mean, right? What is the point and then what can we do with it? So we realize sort of this disconnect, right? In sort of where people want to be and where the skill sets currently are. So, that led us to sort of the first sort of revenue generating business line, which is actually, we formulated our syllabus and actually teach the applications of data science to real estate. And that has pretty good pickup from industry. And so, we run this sort of 11-week sort of master's level course. And it's a touch point for people to come in and say, okay, well, I want to learn the domain specific applications of data science to real estate. So they come and join the course, and at the end of it, they actually learn how to apply some of these techniques. That's going well. There's a small community of people who then join and interact as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then sort of the other two lines of the business right now, we also sell these data and analytics. So, automated valuation is one area. So if you key in an address, our API will give you back a valuation and say what's a fair transaction price. And this is demanded sort of, certain listing websites want to have this feature, certain banks are looking at it in terms of thinking, I want to make certain mortgage loans, or have certain mortgage book, how can I understand what the pricing is? So selling that by API is another line. And we'd also set up a freemium consumer website. You guys can go and visit it if you like. It's called schoolguide.sg. And schoolguide.sg tackles a very specific intersection of information with real estate. And that is, if you are a parent of a young child and you're located in Singapore, there's a competitive process for getting into these schools, and where you live can change outcomes a lot. So given certain information that you key in, we'll be able to tell you where is the best properties to live at to most boost the probability of getting in. What is the probability of getting a child in? And then from the flip side, right? If you're just owned property, which properties benefit the most from being near these highly demanded schools? So that's schoolguide.sg. And that's the second sort of sort of selling data and analytics. We are working on another product now called Real Data Lab that will be essentially individual project reports where given the address, we'll tell you what you need to know in terms of if you think you're going to spend say $1 million, $2 million on the property, wouldn't you want to know, what the outlook is? And no one's really some sort of supplying the information, and that's the next product. The very last line that we're still working on is sort of saying, okay, given all of this, and this is sort of where we wanted to begin with and where the journey began, putting all this information together, can we essentially quantitatively pick properties to invest in and put that into some kind of investment structure? So that's overall sort of, where I began and how I got into it. I think we're happy to sort of go on now and chat a little bit about the prop tech industry and some insights, and happy to take questions at any point. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, perfect.
So I think with this, right, sort of some general points about the prop tech industry. In terms of funding, this is a really hot area, right? Depending on who you ask, the numbers will vary, but the general story is the same. 2011 sort of, investment into prop tech companies was about just under 200 million. And 2019, right, if we manage to sum up all the numbers, right, was about, 150 times as large. And that's just a really large space and really fruitful space to start a lot of companies, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And why is it so particularly important? It's actually interesting. Some of you may have seen this if you look online for this report called How Much is the World Worth? So we'll start to do a quick estimation about how much the value of all real estate is, if you sum it up, versus how much the value of, say, all of the equities in the world, all of the, sort of gold and agricultural land in the world is. And it's just a big, it's just a multiple of what outstanding equities are, right? You can see even residential real estate is, is the lion's share of it. And that's, easily more than double the size of all the listed equities. People, it's risen maybe a little bit since then, but people spend a lot of time talking about, say, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But in terms of the overall sort of, market cap of that, that's just a very small sliver of what the real estate market size is, right? So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential optimization in this space. One other thing that we like to highlight also is, talking about where we are sort of in this journey. So as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I came from this quantitative finance background. So, in sort of early mid 2000s, right, I was in a quantitative hedge fund. And at that point, that was still kind of a new idea, right? You have, at that time, slightly more established players would be things like, sort of Bridgewater, Renaissance Technologies. And then, the fund that I was at is still considered one of these fairly newish ideas. Now you fast forward another sort of 15 years from there, and if we think about where the hedge fund industry is, if, we look at the AUM estimate, right, is about 3.3 trillion USD. And quantitative hedge funds have made such a big inroad, right? At this juncture, it's about 1/3 of all the AUM is actually considered quant hedge funds. And we can look at it another way. We think about public markets, say stock markets. At this date, about 60 to 80% of all the trading is done by computers, right? If you think about, say, 20 years ago, that's just a totally different landscape. And now we compare that, right? We think about the amount of AUM being held by real estate investment managers. We just sum up the top 100, right, based on sort of the IPE count. It's in excess of what the hedge funds are holding, right? Then we think about who's doing sort of a really quantitatively driven real estate investment thesis. There are a handful of small players, and we don't really know what that asset size is, but it's nowhere near like, potentially even say 1% of this size, right? And so we just think that there's a really big opportunity in this space, and that's sort of the reason of getting into this area.
Yeah, so I think just to give a landscape, I think we all, what Nelson's touching on, the finance industry got disrupted or tech enabled quite early compared to now property. So actually PropTech is a branch out of FinTech because again, it's an asset play. But of course, within PropTech, you have, because property is a lot of different activities, right? You can worry about the financials, you can worry about the operational side. So it has to, and then you can worry about the construction side. So ConTech is gaining momentum as well. And of course, we all know the collaborative economy, which the most popular one, which deals around real estate, is Airbnb, which basically helps like unit owners to monetize it in a new way, right? And so, yeah, that's pretty much a landscape. Yeah, then in terms of involvement, so of course it started around PropTech 1.0. It started around when the .NET bubble kind of happened, right, which was late 90s and the early 2000s. Of course, the most popular there were the marketplace, bringing something from print. When I grew up, I still looked sometimes at the newspapers initially or when I was a kid, right, I saw the property listings there, which of course, that was the version 1, which all went online. Of course, in the US, you have the most popular ones, the Zillows, the LoopNets, enterprise software, which is dedicated for operation and finance of real estate players. So 2.0 phase was more about tech-enabled services, collaborative economy, what I mentioned, the Airbnbs, the WeWorks, how to use different business models which are tech-enabled for the real estate industries. Of course, also the brokerage industry in the US was disrupted in a sense. You had the Compass, Redfins, and many more of those brokerage firms which started to gain a market share through tech enablement. Now we are at 3.0, which is really around data, end-to-end leasing processes or end-to-end process in general. And of course, one of the new technology, which is blockchain, which potentially can fractionize investment for real estate stakeholders, right? And so that's basically from 1.0 all the way to 3.0. But that being said, you know, those timelines are not fixed. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities around tech enablement and geography-wise. I know Catalina's from Colombia, which is emerging market. Kantara is trying to do something in Japan. So I think a good take is see what's happening in the US and then potentially bring that back to your markets, because most likely your markets are well behind five or even 10 years. So that's what Nelson and I experienced. We spent 4 months in the US or in Canada last year. And so we saw just the sheer volume of startups, the funding, the ecosystem, the solutions are just probably around 10 years ahead of Southeast Asia, right? So yeah, just I think that's one of the takeaways. So those timelines don't really matter, they're still ongoing.
And yeah, speaking about that, you know, it seems like some of you are interested potentially in starting certain companies in sort of real estate or prop tech startup space, right? A number of different accelerators that we've come into contact with or heard of. You know, I can start. We did around this time last year, in fact, right? Yves and I were up in Toronto doing sort of the College Techstars program. That's actually a pretty good program. It comes with sort of the whole Techstars infrastructure and network, right? And Techstars is all about, you know, having a network to help entrepreneurs succeed. It's about 3 months just under, ending in a big demo day. Big emphasis on mentorship, right? So, you know, we have the Mentor Madness, in which, can't remember the count, but you meet like close to 100 people over the course of 1 or 2 weeks, right? And these sort of, you know, very short conversations. It's good to also have this corporate partner, so having Colliers there backing it and not just being Techstars really helps to open up a lot of doors and connections within the industry that you'd like to operate in. And then I think you started a little bit earlier, right? You know, with this sort of corporate tie-up, there is the potential for striking some kinds of partnerships. A lot of the ventures right now tend to be focused on, hey, can I provide as a startup some kind of data analysis or some feature built on analyzing the data that provides some kind of value. There is still a challenge there, right? There is a lot of sort of sensitivity around sharing of data across the company. And so their outcomes vary, right? So some partnerships were struck where some of the companies did in fact say, okay, specific silo of data we were able to get, colleagues or partners to share. And some were, less successful. So it varies across the board. I think if I remember correctly, some of the outcomes, it's a lot of real estate stuff is still stored in either physical or PDF documents. So some of the startups that were a little bit more successful were saying, hey, let's take these PDF documents and make them into sort of a digital record, which can then be analyzed. And I think that presented enough value to go forward versus, sort of, okay, already sort of translated records is slightly more challenging, right? Yves, you want to talk about Propel Asia and how that compares?
Yes, so 2018, we went into Propel Asia, which was the first Southeast Asian Proptech Accelerator. I think our motivation was it was sponsored by JLL and Lendlease, so we had exposure and opportunity to do a POC, a trial with one of the largest brokerage firms, as well as one of the largest integrated real estate players or developers in the world, Lendlease. And yeah, I mean, it was a good experience. A lot of doors opened. As usual, when dealing with large corporates, it's slow. It moves slower than hoped. But I think two things about all those accelerators. I would say, if you're a first-time founder, definitely go into one of those because it's kind of a compressed startup school. So you will avoid a lot of mistakes. And also, if you want to have the network, then go into as well, right? This the other option, you go and work in the real estate industry, which I also recommend, and you build your network organically and your experience. I think there are kind of those two benefits for me to go into Accelerator.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, the other benefit is sort of the networking across different sort of startups and startup entrepreneurs. There's partnerships you can strike there, and then I guess it's also kind of like support group, right? You guys are going through the same challenges, so sort of, how do you resolve them and so on. Just on the rest of what we put here, there seems to be an increasing number of accelerators occurring. There's Pi Labs based out in the UK, right? And then I think Australia is this RealTech X, which is Toronto Ventures and somebody else, right? China has, I think it's Swire Ping An, right? They're having the Urban Lab. And then there are a couple which like don't even have a fixed location to our knowledge, right? Plug and Play, which also has sort of the VC fund behind it. They organize it, but it's unclear where exactly the location is, and right? So from time to time it changes. And then we've also heard of this Urban X, which doesn't have a fixed location. So yeah, that's the range of accelerator programs. There's probably a few more that we haven't heard of, but it's an interesting space. So maybe consider doing that as well.
Yeah, I think this is just to display. I think that's also the big fours or the KPMGs, the PwCs, they all started real estate focused practice, I think around 5-6 years ago, right? And so they do quite good research as well. And look it up if you're interested in PropTech. They usually release a dedicated document, and so that's a good one to read up on. I think that it's kind of going back into the initial number, which is just kind of the journey of investment it's attracting from the venture capital side, and it's just growing. And even I just read an article yesterday, so there was a slump, of course, in first quarter into PropTech investment. No surprise, right? It's probably across the world. But actually, the third quarter already showed increase year on year compared to 2019. So meaning this PropTech thing is really there to last. It's just getting bigger and bigger. More deals are being done, more ticket sizes, all stage investment. So that's just like there to stay. That will not go away anymore.
Yeah, and so
I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, and please to jump in as well. Just those of you looking to start some companies as well. One of the routes again, not necessarily correct for every type of company, but if you are looking sort of at VC sort of backed ventures, here are some of the companies that are operating and notable in the space. That's obviously the Fifth Wall and Metaprop are pretty big names in the space. participating in sort of the college Techstars, we come into contact with Ali, based out in Canada, and then 94 Ventures, based out in the US, right? So these are some of the companies that you want to look up. Did you, Yves, were you in contact with Taronga and the others?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much studied all of them, right? And I think the one way to highlight is Fifth Wall, because they were the first one doubling down on the industry and saying, look, we are going to raise initial 200 million, then followed by 500 million fund, which is purely dedicated to real estate, right? And it's extremely sizable. And they really they really helped like companies to go through all the stages, right? From A, B, C. And I think it's interesting one. Look it up. They have great content. I think they're backing a lot of kind of category winners. So if you're also interested to probably join fast growing scaling company, then look them up with their backing. And I think that's the one for me to highlight. And I think in Asia, something like Fifth Wall is still missing, which is really helping startups to connect them with the landlords, because Fifth Wall's landlords, the LPs, are obviously all real estate players. And so part of their deal is that the Tishmans, the Oxfords, the Brookfields, they are actually providing their properties as a trial. And so they are actually really connecting the entire ecosystem and funding it. So yeah, I think really crucial for the success of PropTech in North America.
Yeah, and on that note, I guess you're absolutely right. I think there's still a gap or space there for somebody to do a little bit more activity in the VC space in Asia, right? We had CapitaLand had C31 Ventures, but looks like they closed it relatively recently or stalled it. And then we were sort of in the loop where somebody else was trying to, one of the funds was trying to push a PropTech side of it, but I don't think it took off as well. So there is definitely some opportunity here.
Yeah, so I think these are just a couple of deals which happened this year, the first one is actually a platform called CRETech. Look it up. It's a really nice end-to-end marketplace for commercial real estate, selling and leasing. Super smooth UI UX. They raised $30 million sometime early year. And I think it's their Series B, but yeah, start 2016. And so they're kind of doubling down in a geography and with a great tech solution, right? And so I think that's still working. And even though there's a lot of activities, right, in the US, but what I mentioned before, just look at your market you want to penetrate and then provide the best solution for that. And then I think there's still a lot of opportunities. Tishman just a week ago announced that they are going into PropTech, even larger than just as an LP. So they created this SPAC and then they will invest through that in PropTech. So interesting one to look up, but also gives you a sign that the large players are really, really serious about that space, right? And then the last one is kind of interesting. It's more a consolidation story. So you have large companies, PropTech companies like CoStar, which have been around from the first instance, like for more than 20 years. They are successful, they have really strong balance sheet, and they're just acquiring a lot of companies, and they're pretty much acquiring competition out of the game. And so, but yeah, if you're a startup entrepreneur, then there's definitely like a trend for consolidation as well. So your exit opportunity is also quite good if you bring it to a certain level.
So, you know, we just wanted to highlight a little bit about some of the types of opportunities or types of companies that are in the PropTech space. Potentially, you know, if you are thinking about where you might want to start some kinds of businesses, these are some areas that could be interesting. Or you can kind of spot certain gaps that are not currently there. Yves and I being based in Singapore right now, this is actually a PropTech map of Singapore. We've never really published this anywhere, but it's actually kind of useful. Even being a small company, we have sort of in excess of 50 companies in the PropTech space. So we can chat a little bit about some of them and what they're doing. Interestingly, I think Yves touched on construction tech, right? So one of the companies that is kind of interesting in that space, this H3zoom Ai. So they were actually backed by, I think it was our Jurong Town Corporation, which is like a semi-governmental organization. And they sort of wanted somebody to develop a solution like this. And what H3zoom AI does is have these drones that can fly on the outside of a building and actually look at the building and sort of find defects in there. And I think the next phase for them is to actually fire a sonar at the building and find the cracks so that you avoid having somebody climb up and down. So again, that's one area, and I think they're doing pretty well. I'm obviously, given what we are doing, I wanted to touch a little bit about the data science space, and the sort of data and analytics space. A couple of interesting companies in here. H3 is a company that does floor plan scoring. So if you think about residential real estate, the layout of the unit can definitely affect, whether it is a good purchase or not, and how livable it is. And there isn't that many firms that are trying to do that and try to tell you, given a floor plan, this is where it ranks potentially on this range of properties you could potentially buy or rent. And so they have all of these floor plans and they converted them into a particular type of data. And they actually give you a number, right? So I can't remember whether it's out of 5 or out of 10, but like, okay, let's just say out of 5, this is like a 4 out of 5 in terms of the floor plan and the layout, the ratio of the living room to the balcony and the flow of the property and things like that. So that's an interesting area that I think is kind of underserved. A couple of international companies in this space. You have Archeologic and Archelize, originally Switzerland based, and they are doing a little bit more commercial real estate, sort of taking the floor plans and sort of figuring out the flow, right? And I guess the light and things like that. So that's an interesting area. Kumi Analytics out of Singapore also selling satellite data. So with that satellite data, you can kind of figure out the amount of light intensity across the map. And potentially that's interesting if you want to think about development of upcoming townships or information about where you might, where is sort of a hot and growing area. So that's another totally different application. And then our own company, PropertyQuants, where we are sort of teaching the applications of data science to real estate and also selling sort of these data and analytics, either as a website or we can sell it by API, and ultimately wanting to move towards using this to actually invest. Yves, do you want to pick a couple?
I think I don't have too much to add, but like the last two transactions noted was that actually consolidation as well. 99Co purchased SRX. So this consolidation, this listing search that enabled brokerage. But then on the other hand, I was with the founder of PropSeller recently. He just closed, I think, close to $2 million round. And he's doing a tech-enabled brokerage play. So meaning, yeah, those business models, they are still very active here in Southeast Asia. And I would even say they're still at the relatively early stage compared to the US.
Yeah, absolutely. So just some of the other opportunities there, right? There's also sort of retail analytics, right? So OmniStream does this in Singapore, another Techstars company doing that with a retail space, doing that out in the US. So trying to figure out, right, for a particular location, right, does this make sense for a particular type of retail? It can be interesting. Flex spaces, definitely a lot of opportunity. Co-living is well known. Metro residences is interesting. Sort of if you are a residential landlord, Airbnb is not always allowed. So sometimes a little bit of a longer lease is allowed and still can give you a higher yield. So they operate in the in-between space, right? VR, AR is really popular, right? You have Matterport, but then also the other players as well, sort of enabling you to visualize a property without visiting it. And that's a trend that's sort of taking off now, right? As it's becoming not necessarily so easy to do physical viewings, right? So that's really popular. And then obviously fractional investing. Singapore has its share of sort of the crowdfunding fractional investing in real estate, and US has more established market, and then in Europe, there are a couple of players as well, allowing people to essentially get a little bit of exposure to real estate. And some of these companies start as small as like 50 euros, and then you can go from there. This is sort of the US map. We put it on there just for reference, but there's a ton of things here we won't necessarily go through. But there are other spaces as well that could be interesting. iBuyers are not that present in a lot of the other countries, right? I think Spain has one now. but a lot of countries don't have these iBuyers. And sort of the idea in a nutshell is, if I can build a statistical model to potentially price your home fairly accurately, then I can become like a dealer and I can make an automated bid for your house. And if you key in the address, you can essentially just click and get a quote, and you could click sell now and be done with it and provide liquidity to the real estate market, right? So that's a really exciting area, and some of the funds being raised in that area are also really large. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to highlight, Yves?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Yeah, and then commercial real estate, right? That there's tons of opportunity here as well. Just the data provision is also really popular, right? So, CoreLogic, CoStar being sort of large incumbents. Comstack is kind of interesting as well. So for commercial real estate, individual brokers sort of supply in the comps in order to get some kind of points, and with those points can extract out other comps so that they can, do whatever it is in terms of sort of closing a deal or getting that information. And Comstack with their database turns around and is able to sell that, right? And so sells it for a reasonably large price, right? So that's another interesting model there. And Terra doing sort of tech-enabled brokerage. So the money is being made in the traditional brokerage side, but the analytics, given they are very data-driven, and there's a lot of analysis on that. So those are some interesting opportunities in the space as well.
I think we have a question from Catalina.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I wanted to see what's your guys' perception and what are the kind of trends that have been accelerated with COVID? Where are the gaps that are kind of necessitating to be filled? I imagine there's a lot in like property management and like touchless and all of that, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things that it's difficult to perceive in our end.
So yeah, absolutely. I think definitely this sort of VR and AR trend has some degree of pickup, right? So sort of the virtual viewings, or if you think about cross-border investment, let's say I want to buy a residential property in the UK, but I'm based in Singapore. Now I can't even fly there, right? So what are some ways to be able to understand what it is I'm buying? So people who are doing that kind of visualization, right? So Matterport is one of them. Is definitely something that is doing a little bit, has a lot more interest in it right now. Yves, what other?
Yeah, I think great question. I think the best thing or the most positive thing that COVID brought was that every person in real estate had to use either Slack or Zoom or something like that. So they believe now that technology works, right? And technology tools are working, and that's actually the most positive, right? So we had so many webinars throughout, and even the executives, which are traditional real estate, with a traditional real estate mindset, they start to realize that, yeah, technology is actually necessary during that crisis, but even beyond. And I think that's actually the most positive, which we see. And so the openness for adoption of all kinds of tools, right? Again, if you're an owner of properties, you're looking at most areas and you can plug in a technology. And so I think that's really what I saw as the best impact which COVID brought, because it's a mindset change, and finally they are more open for adoption and they're actually seriously putting it in their agenda, right? And yeah, I mean, of course, on the leasing side where I mostly focus, Matterport, which is a virtual tour, has definitely gained ground here in Asia as well. You pretty much see it in every marketplace plugged in. Yeah, I used to be in commercial leasing, and you literally have to close a deal, you have on average 5 viewings across 6 to 9 or 12 months, right? And so just shorten the deal cycle and make it more efficient, and giving them a better picture on the visualization, but also access of information. So I think that's really something I see a push into it on the commercial side. But then, of course, as you mentioned, Catalina, all the operation side, the air quality, all those aspects, touch pointless access, etc., tracking food traffic in Asia, more visible than in other parts of the world, right? So yeah, all those solutions are also gaining good momentum through that.
I think just to continue there, another sort of trend, and profitability is another question, But sort of the co-working space, right? Like, as we sort of reassess like how much office space we need, there's definitely an interest to try and figure out whether co-working is a good solution for sort of making things more dynamic and having a hot desking answer. But it's also really competitive, right? So whether those individual companies are going to be profitable is another question, but I think there's a lot more interest in using some of these solutions. And on the flip side, as an operator, right? We've seen this trend, at least here, where you had hotels, right? And nobody's in the hotel. And so they convert the lobby, right, into essentially a co-working space, right? So that generates some revenue. And so there's activity there. Whether that's meaningful to them, right, in the long run, it's unclear, but there's definitely more activity there.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, I think that's a good point. If you think of Asia, where you have a large chunk of the largest malls in the world, and yeah, just to think of now access, foot traffic is limited in some countries, a lot of shops closed, right? Small outlets. And I think it's kind of this repositioning positioning process they're going through. And so I think any tech, whether it's a marketplace for pop-up retail, whether it's helping them to repurpose space to maybe warehousing, etc. So everything which can help them in that repositioning process, right? And we are talking about some cities like New York. I read an article that they are, because now the workforce may not come back to the center to the volume than pre-COVID. So they're looking to rezoning some of the commercial properties into residential to help on the residential side, to ease the high rental levels, right, etc. So I think anything which can help them in repositioning, so you can just take a niche and build a solution around that. And I think that's something worthwhile to think of as well. In the long run, think of all the parking spaces which are allocated as well. So is that still really necessary, right? There's a lot of interesting opportunities around that.
Cool. So also just wanted to share some interesting touch points in this space. Not sure when in-person conferences will begin again, but one of the bigger conference organizers was CRETech, right? So actually, again, maybe about a year ago at this time, we were out in New York taking part in the New York conference for CRETech. And so, as you move forward, that could be an interesting one to watch. Then also, over the course of the year, acquired Future Proptech, right, which is the London-based sort of conference organizer. So I think the London conference, whenever it starts, is going to be called CRETech London, but now it's actually a reasonable conference as well. And if you go on the website, right, there's a bunch of news that you can keep track of, companies in the space, right, you sign up for the mailing list. The other ones are also similar idea, maybe, but for different geographies, right? Unisu and Placetech sort of operating out of London and Europe. Same thing, keeping track of like PropTech news. And then Asia PropTech operating out of Hong Kong, right? Trying to keep track of what's going on in PropTech in Asia. They organize certain things. So like recently they had a bit of it's like a webinar sort of debate about the future of automated valuation in Asia, right? So things like that. Built World, it's a fairly global footprint. We've seen them in Singapore, but I think they operate elsewhere. Like they have an Africa branch and things like that. So that's a good touch point. And then for recruiting or careers, so PropertyQuants does have a partnership with LMRE, just in the interest of why we bring them up. But also, if you guys are looking to hire out a team in PropTech, or if you're looking to get into certain roles in PropTech or real estate where they maybe do some more advanced or more forward-thinking things, LMRE is potentially a good source for that. I just wanted to touch on as PropertyQuants, we do organize a seminar talking about like data science and machine learning for real estate. If you know anybody who's interested in that, it's a 2-day seminar. You can go to our website, propertyquants.com/seminar. And we do also conduct an 11-week sort of full like master's level course in sort of the technical, how do you apply data science specifically to real estate, starting with 3 weeks of getting up to speed with actually programming, doing data science, right? So learning Python and scikit-learn and things like that, through to applying some of the techniques that are really real estate specific, such as property price indexation, building an automated valuation model, forecasting, using geographic information systems, and so on. So again, if you know anyone who's interested in that, do point them to PropertyQuants.com/training. I think that's more or less the content that we wanted to cover. Happy to take some questions or go through any of this. Yves, did you have anything in particular you want to highlight before that?
No, I think that's it. Yeah. Any questions if you guys have, or yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Nelson and Eva. I know that we're kind of running out of time, but we can take like maybe 1 or 2 questions. And please chime in with unmuting yourself, or just you can raise your group hand and then I can point it out.
Kantaro already had the question at the beginning, right?
Yeah. So I actually have a question, and I think you kind of touched on this, but is there any? So do you observe any area of PropTech startups that you see in the United States, and then that we don't see in Asia, or we see in Asia but you don't see in the United States?
Well, I think US into Euro regions plenty, so it's just I don't understand Japanese, so I can't really do research there. But actually, when I went to Japan, was interesting. So I met with Colliers there, and they told me that they already had a platform. Just to give information, Tokyo is one of the largest office markets by footprint in the world, right? Something like 90 million square meter of office, which is insane, right, for brokers to keep track on it. So anyway, they already had a platform or a database of where landlords can push their listings, and every brokerage firm would access that, right? The CBREs, the JLRs, etc. So it was already centralized, because that's actually the first thing I thought 2010 when I was in work for CBRE, is like, why is there no database, right? So now turns out like Japan already has it. But if I go to North America, any other parts in the world, it just doesn't really exist. So interestingly, Japan actually had it. But then on the flip side, I think there's so much tech in North America which hasn't reached Japan yet, right? In terms of, again, leasing transactions, data analytics as well. I think we touched on that, Kantaro. And so I think just look at those models, go through the landscape and where you're passionate, and see where's this opportunity to work maybe in a direction, right? I think that really, yeah, makes sense. But for me, it's still, if I look at Asia and then vice versa, I think it's just being open to have a super app, which means we have one app like WhatsApp, they call it WeChat in China, and then all your services, not just B2C, not just your payments, you're looking up a hotel or something. You also have B2B is all taking place there. So meaning you actually would have a property manager, which would use their messaging app to service tenants, but also, yeah, probably book certain facilities, etc. So I just see the appetite, or the culture is more into like super apps, and probably here in, especially in China, right?
So just touching on Japan, one company that always gets sort of recommended for us to look into is Leeways, Leeways. Supposedly tech-enabled brokerage, but it's, everything there is in Japanese, so I've never had very much success in understanding exactly what it is. But seems like an exciting space. And then we touched on it a little bit just now, but I think these sort of instant buyer models are really popular in the US, and could be interesting to try to implement out in Asia. Especially urban market could be even more straightforward to get a good valuation, right, in a condominium or apartment block building. There are obviously legal constraints and tax considerations that make it difficult across jurisdictions. As an example, in Singapore, if you directly bought it, right, as a corporation, you'd end up paying today approximately 25% in stamp duty, which would make the whole business like not tenable. But maybe there's a business development way of getting yourself into sort of the regulatory sandbox. And if you could do that, right, then maybe you could avoid that. But I think iBuyers is one example, and there are many others.
Thank you. Kate?
Hi, I'm sorry I'm not on video. I'm trying to squeeze in dinner, but I really wanted to get your thoughts on mobile transactions and real estate, especially within the residential sector. So I've been seeing a number of apps and websites that basically enable people to search for real estate, apply for a mortgage, and then actually do some of the transaction or most of the transaction on their phone. And I'm curious to just hear your perspective and opinions on that. I also spent 5 years in China and kind of was there seeing the quick adoption of mobile payments and the WeChat phenomenon, obviously, and how that really took over our world from 2013 to 2018. And so just would love to hear your thoughts about mobile transactions within the residential real estate industry, and then if you can draw any parallels between how Asia versus or China versus the US would how you might differentiate between those two.
A little bit. I mean, some of the things that I saw is kind of interesting for mobile, right? For some of the listing websites, there's a little bit of like some features coming out where you can do a bit of augmented reality, virtual reality viewing, right? So, you can stick up your phone and kind of understand like which units are available and what the pricing is. So that can be interesting. There's a general push, right? People are always saying that like, hey, if I can disintermediate some of these broker processes, there seems to be a big pie there. But there is sort of, there's some adoption, but maybe not all the way. And so maybe taking a step back, sort of a bigger challenge is why is the sort of practice or culture or consumer behavior such that people actually still demand or like having a real estate agent, a physical person, right, involved in the process, right? Is it a trust level thing? Given the size of what's going on, is that the issue? And how can we sort of address that? We've seen a little bit about sort of electronic payments for rent. So some companies like Rent Hero out in Singapore, allowing you to essentially use your credit card to make payment and essentially get sort of airline miles on the top of that. So maybe that's an interesting angle to help out. So those are some of my loose thoughts around this area. Yves?
Yeah, look, I think it's a lot that has to do with cultural aspect, but also how developed the finance market is, right? In the US, it's still the dream. Everyone owns a home. It's being financed heavily. I don't think, and that's why you have now those like instant transaction services on mobile, but also the guys like Redfin, they will just value and purchase you a property pretty much within an hour or something, right? And I think we are not there in Asia. Well, let's separate China and Southeast Asia, right? China is a 1.5 billion with a language barrier, so I have little visibility. I've never lived in China, but there's a lot of extreme exciting stuff coming out there. Southeast Asia is 750 million people, so I mean, we are focusing on that region, and that's what we understand. The challenge here, it's a mix of highly developed world like Singapore, but more so we have a lot of emerging markets, right? And so the infrastructure there is still very basic. So we don't have the finance markets which would issue mortgages on the go, right? It is a higher risk profile. So you actually see the fintech opportunities are being penetrated there right now, where probably the US already penetrated like 10, 15 years ago, right? So yeah, there's a different, again, time, but also culture, but also stage of economic development where we are looking at. But look, I think the process of now plugging in that buying process, make it seamless, huge opportunity. It's a freaking pain dealing with brokers, probably here even more so in this part of the world, and it's super inefficient. They don't show up, etc. Right? So it's like you could save so much time, but yeah, it just will take more time here in Southeast Asia.
How much do you think blockchain will play a role in that, in the transactional aspects of real estate?
How much time will be reduced? Well, when we project it for like leasing, commercial leasing, which again, a deal can take 6 to 9 months sometime, you can easily reduce it by 30%. Yeah, just like lowering the level of physical viewings, centralizing your term sheet, your negotiation, which is currently done in emails and phone calls, uncaptured information. So yeah, around, I see in the US, the large platforms like VTS, which are doing this end-to-end leasing and asset management commercial, they're displaying a percentage of 1/3. So, which I believe that's about right. Now in residential, yeah, I think in Asia, I read it's basically like a 12 to 24 months journey to purchase a home, right? I mean, Nelson can probably comment on that, but yeah, which has to do, of course, it's a big decision, emotion, etc., but also has to do with navigating through brokers. I mean, when I first leased a property in Singapore, when I moved here from Manila 3 years ago, I mean, terrible experience, right? And so you could address that problem and make that from me finding in 6 months a suitable place to probably one month, I think, right? So
I think if I heard correctly, you also wanted to ask about blockchain. Is that right? All right. So
sorry, okay, I missed that. Sorry.
No, which it depends, right? Like on what is the government regulation, right? So last that we heard also was that like I think Dubai was sort of allowing the use of that for sort of the land registry, right? So most countries already have, to be honest, some kind of centralized solution. And the question is like whether the governments would find it advantageous to switch to some kind of blockchain-based solution. I'm not as involved in that space, so I can't speak to it as well. But I do think that like for developed world, there's typically a solution which is already in place. Maybe if you're in some kind of frontier market where it isn't that clear how we transmit these property rights, then maybe they can leapfrog and go to a blockchain-based solution. So maybe it's there. And like, people love to say that, oh, I would love to look at frontier markets here. We're always being asked like, hey, can you do some kind of data analysis on Myanmar, right? And like, maybe Vietnam's actually a bit more, getting more developed now. And so if we say, hey, I'm going to buy this property in Myanmar, and then having this kind of blockchain-based solution could even be more trustworthy than saying, oh, I trust the government process or something like that. The other area that I think it's sort of popular is tokenization or fractionalization of ownership. It is a popular area, right? It helps, maybe to take a slightly more cynical view of it, it helps skirt around certain regulations that would otherwise make it an IPO offering and attract some of the regulatory requirements. So that helps, right? And various countries, I know Singapore is somewhat supportive, and I think Japan, I've heard, has some potential support for some of the regulatory framework that you might need to launch that. I think the questions in sort of fractionalization and tokenization are like, from a consumer point of view, would I prefer to just buy a REIT, right? And then liquidity, right, around the secondary market of that, right? So may not be the blockchain part of the problem, but like just sort of the investment experience and investment opportunity. Yves, did you have anything on blockchain in particular?
Yeah, I think what we see is, countries like Singapore, because establishing them more and more as a tech hub, so they're definitely open for blockchain. But to be honest, I haven't seen too many solutions going live. I know I was with Entrepreneur in a program early this year, and he started a blockchain-based certification company, basically like they certify like degrees, but now they also certify health confirmation, right? And so he's gaining quite good traction. So meaning, yeah, that's a problem he's solving, and so there it works out. I think going back to real estate, what I would see in emerging countries like maybe Colombia, Philippines, you have like a lot of cases like fraudulent title cases, right? And so I think actually blockchain could definitely solve that. But then again, it's what Nelson mentioned. It's all about willingness of the government and the policymakers, right, to tie up with that. So it becomes a strong relationship play. Technology-wise, for sure, I think MIT is one of the best blockchain kind of programs. And so I was working with Entrepreneur, which had the CTO from MIT. So I think you guys are on the right spot if you want to go into that, because it's also a talent question, right? It's such a new technology. It was a gold rush time a few years back, but everyone claimed to be able to do blockchain. But I think there are only a few people which actually really do understand how to build blockchain And if we go back into, if it's just a database problem, then you just can use any traditional databases to build something, right? You don't need blockchains.
Sorry, I have a question. First, thank you for your presentation today. I'm sorry I missed the first part since I had class. So what I wanted to know was that behind the reason why the Proptech company increased like recently, was there also a case that the availability of data improved within that period, or is it the accumulation of each company's hard work, or like, is there a systematic change in terms of availability of data? I'm asking since I'm also from Japan and there's an opaqueness about the availability of information. And I think that's hampering the immersion of PropTech. So I was wondering if that increase was attributable to the availability of data.
Well, I think actually why increase it for, I think it's activity of entrepreneurship, right? People from outside of the real estate industry, technologists took on, went on in the industry and solved the problems through tech, right? And so then of course that attracts venture capital if talented people go into a space. Also, workforce like us, which worked in the real estate and just has experienced frustration in their day-to-day, we go on and try to solve it, right, through a startup. And so I think that's the main reason, like it attracts a lot of talent. And so I think data, well, data is a big thing, but the data is kind of, we had a slide on that, there's kind of now the 3.0 kind of emergence of PropTech, right? And it is still really difficult to gain access to data. And so I would say, I don't think that's per se the reason, but it still gives you a huge opportunity to create a business around, right? And Kentaro has an idea into Japan, and I think it's a great idea. Now the question is, how do you get access to that data?
So just to add to that, I think it's sort of uneven, right? It depends what types of startups and what type of space. So definitely, data availability has increased, say for residential, right? In a lot of developed markets, right? You think about, say, as Yves was saying, when he was younger, looking at classified ads, and now it's all on these listing websites, and they all sort of have some kind of aggregation of that. A lot of countries have opened up open data portals. So data.gov in the US, data.gov.sg, data.gov.au, opening up the sort of surrounding macroeconomic, demographic, spatial sort of information that allows you to build these, even say urban planning, right? So there are a couple of startups, right? Like Envelope City in the US, Ratio City in Canada, a couple of other players, right? That actually can take these urban plans, because that data is now online, put it onto the map and say, okay, here are taking into account the plot size and the airspace, here are the redevelopment opportunities. So all of that wouldn't have been possible if there wasn't digitalization and opening up the data. But it's uneven, right? So as you point out, in Japan, maybe it is a little bit less. I think there, you have a RAINS network or something like that, but I don't know how.
RAINS.
Yeah, that's not a good way of like the information is so limited and it's like so old system that needs to be replaced. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you're right. So then that maybe is causing sort of a lag, right, in Japan's adoption, right? And then what Yves is saying, absolutely, it's difficult, especially for commercial real estate, where companies are still holding it really close to their chest and don't want to share. And that definitely does slow down the adoption of certain types of data-driven businesses, but then not others, right? So there's a lot of boom, and we saw the range of companies in the landscape. They're not all data-driven businesses. A lot of them are doing something else, right?
Yeah, just to add on that, actually, it's a good point you guys brought up the visualization side. What I see is you have huge opportunities to just basically build that visualization layer, right, on top of something. Because I do think, especially in Asia, like UI UX experience of a lot of the existing solution is quite mediocre, but even in the US as well. And so I think just try to think how you can utilize the existing infrastructure and just present it in a better way and make it mobile friendly, make it easy accessible, go away from this whole ERP heavy type of software, right? And I think that's a huge opportunity to tap as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, we've already passed 15 minutes, but yeah, thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And so I think I'll call this to the end for this Real Estate Club speaker session today. And see you everyone, and see you Nelson, Eva. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for organizing, Kentaro. Please connect on LinkedIn or shoot me an email if there's any further questions. And yeah, enjoy dinner time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.